Hi, welcome to another episode of African Biographics. In this video, we look at the Somali War, which is one of the most terrible wars in Africa, and this civil war has been waged in this country for almost 3 decades. Somalia has been in a state of dysfunction and anarchy since the government of the late dictator General Mohamed Siad Barre was ousted in 1991. This country has been bruised and battered by the war, which has seen the involvement of different clans from the country, warlords and extremist groups such as Al-Shabab. In this video, we look at the background of this long-standing civil war and the current state of the country of Somalia. If you're new to this channel, don't be shy to press the subscription button and the notifications bell so that you don't miss out on any new content from this channel. To get a sense of the genesis of the Somali Civil War, we have to look at the events that occurred after the country got independence. In the late 19th century, the area that would become Somalia was colonized by Britain in the north and Italy in the south. Britain would eventually withdraw from British Somaliland in 1960 to allow its protectorate to join with Italian Somaliland and form the new nation of Somalia. French Somaliland would become modern-day Djibouti. During the democratic era, which was from 1960 to 1969, newly established state institutions failed to meet the people's expectations. In the country, poverty increased and security levels deteriorated. Moreover, there was corruption and nepotism which characterized the state institutions. The government of that time was then eventually overthrown on October 22, 1969 after a coup that was done by Major General Mohamed Siad Barre. Initially, the socialist government of Mohamed Siad Barre promoted a strong sense of nationalist unity, but with time, Siad made himself the head of a supreme revolutionary council and imposed autocratic rule through a personality cult and a harsh enforcement of an official ideology called scientific socialism. The issue of clanism was a major threat to national unity, and it was easy for political elites to manipulate this arrangement in their favor. Siad Barre would officially outlaw clan loyalties. At the same time, Siad Barre's government used indiscriminate killing, burning of villages and torture as instruments of control. Meanwhile, Somalia also had aspirations to unify all Somali populations from neighboring countries, including those from parts of Ethiopia, into one single Somali state. This culminated in a disastrous war in Ethiopia between 1977 to 1978. Somalia would lose the war, and the heavy casualties and refugee crisis which ensued would accelerate an already pronounced drift towards political repression which was being imposed by Siad Barre's government. When Siad Barre was in power, the people of Somalia had no mechanisms for registering their discontent and disgruntlements. When, in 1978, some military officers attempted to overthrow the military regime of Siad Barre, his government used the national army and the police to punish civilian members of the Mujahideen clan, which was the clan that tried to overthrow his regime. The military was subsequently involved in the killing of civilians, mass abuses, and the destruction of areas that were inhabited by this clan. The 1980s would see Somalia become one of the most repressive and predatory regimes in Africa. Siad Barre would also use divide and rule tactics to keep hold of power, and this exacerbated the division amongst the clans of Somalia. This state of repression would be one of the major causes of the civil war, and at this point, Somalia was a nation that was ripe for armed conflict. It is also important to note that Siad Barre's reign was during the Cold War. Because of Somalia's strategic location, the two superpowers of the time, the former Soviet Union and the United States, would compete to arm Siad Barre's regime. At the same time, Somalia was in deep poverty, and this combined with rapid population growth meant that there were high levels of unemployment amongst the youth. But because of Somalia's strategic importance in the Cold War, Siad Barre's regime was able to attract high levels of foreign aid, giving it the ability to build one of the largest long-standing armies in sub-Saharan Africa. That large army would help to absorb the growing number of the unemployed youth. Now, in the 1980s, the Cold War began to wane, and so did Somalia's strategic importance to these superpowers, and this resulted in a reduction of foreign aid to the country. The reduction in aid money resulted in the shrinkage of the army, and in turn meant that Siad Barre's power was significantly diminished. In 1991, opposing rebel forces would go on to oust Siad Barre from power. Despite the successful overthrow of this repressive regime, the clans involved were unable to agree on a suitable replacement for Siad Barre. As a result of clan rivalry, the country descended into a civil war with various factions vying for control of certain regions. The two largest factions were the Somali National Movement, who controlled the north of Somalia, and the United Somali Congress, who claimed most of the south, including the capital of Mogadishu. The period of 1991 to 1992 would see a devastating war in the country. Early on, the different groups couldn't agree to a peace agreement. A major reason for this was the legacy of deep distrust between the clans that was sown by Siad Barre as a part of his divide and rule tactics. Secondly, there was a major wave of retaliatory attacks on clans associated with the Siad Barre government, which produced a massive wave of ethnic cleansing across all of Somalia, as virtually all Somalis were forced to flee to their clan home bases for security. Also, a war economy began to quickly develop in Somalia, in which militias and their financial backers had powerful incentives to perpetuate a state of war. The resulting conflict in Somalia during this period resulted in the displacement, killing and starvation of thousands of civilians and the onset of a humanitarian crisis. There was famine and the disruption of farming and livestock production. Increasing numbers of refugees left the country for neighboring Kenya and Ethiopia. Also in May of 1991, the Somali National Movement, having secured control of the former British Somaliland northern region, declared that the 1960 federation to form Somalia was null and void, and that henceforth the northern region would be independent and known as the Republic of Somaliland. Though not recognized internationally, the enclave of Republic of Somalia has enjoyed peace and quiet over the years. The period of 1992 to 1995 was centered on the United Nations and the United States interventions in Somalia. In 1992, responding to political chaos and humanitarian disaster in Somalia, the United States and other nations launched peacekeeping operations to create an environment in which assistance would be delivered to the Somali people. By March of 1993, the potential for mass starvation in Somalia had been overcome, but the security situation remained fragile. When the United States and the United Nations withdrew their forces from Somalia in 1994 and 1995 respectively, after suffering significant casualties, order still had not been restored in the country. Somalis would continue to flee the country as internal displacement became a routine in particular regions of the country. However, in the late 1990s, relative calm began to emerge and economic development accelerated somewhat. The country was by no means stable, but it was improving. In the year of 2000, the Somalia National Peace Conference, which was held in Djibouti, resulted in the formation of an interim government known as the Transitional National Government of Somalia. When this government failed to establish adequate security or governing institutions, the government of Kenya would lead a subsequent peacekeeping process, which was concluded in October of 2004 with the election of a president for a second interim government. The Ethiopian military forces, which had entered Somalia in December of 2006 to support the TFG government, in the face of advances by the opposition Union of Islamic Courts, withdrew from the country. The Union of Islamic Courts is a parent group for the Islamic extremist group now known as Al-Shabab. We will cover the issue of Al-Shabab shortly. By 2011, the Somali principals had agreed to institute a political transition, which was to occur by August of 2012. One other reason that has propagated the war in Somalia and made peace elusive is the Islamic extremist group known as Al-Shabab. Its story started when, in the absence of a central government authority, the Union of Islamic Courts took over control over much of the south and central Somalia. Fears of the growing radical Islamist agenda of the UIC prompted the Ethiopian armed forces to invade the country in December of 2006 with 14,000 troops. The rule of the UIC abruptly ended and much of its older leadership would flee Somalia. The youth wing of the UIC, known as Al-Shabab, emerged to challenge the Ethiopian armed forces. Ethiopia withdrew its forces in 2009, leaving Al-Shabab in control of much of the southern Somalia, including the capital of Mogadishu. This prompted a military intervention by Kenya. Fearful of its growing extremism, coupled with its public allegiance to Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that was once led by Osama bin Laden, Western states embraced an aggressive counter-terrorism approach towards Al-Shabaab. This included creating the African Union Mission to Somalia peacekeeping force known as AMISOM with the support of the Western states. There was an establishment of the East African Counter-Terrorism Initiative by the United States, who had also established a military base in neighboring Djibouti. This strategy worked as Al-Shabaab lost vast amounts of territory within the country. However, this group, Al-Shabab, is still a nuisance in the country of Somalia and the region, and this is why peace in this region is still elusive. Almost 3 decades on, and even though there's still war in the country, Somalia is starting to look like a nation on the mend. International stakeholders and analysts have subsequently started to describe Somalia as a fragile state that is making some progress towards stability. Efforts to improve the capacity of the Somali government have registered some important progress. Somalia has successfully conducted 2 presidential and parliamentary elections. Crucially, it has also embarked on major political and institutional overhaul, including the writing of a new constitution and the formation of federal states. Hopefully, this country will continue on this trajectory towards peace and stability. Let me know in the comment section below if you found this video useful. Also, don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.